You know that feeling when someone you trust completely just shatters your world? When everything you thought you knew about them crumbles in a single moment. I'm about to tell you a story that changed my life forever, and honestly, I'm still processing it all even now. Before we get into this wild ride together, I need you to do something for me. If you've ever had your faith in someone completely shaken, if you've ever discovered that the person you loved wasn't who you thought they were, hit that like button right now. Because what I'm about to share with you, it's going to take you on an emotional roller coaster that you won't see coming. And listen, I know everyone says this, but seriously, make sure you subscribe and turn on those notifications. Because by the time I finish telling you what happened that night at the restaurant, and what I discovered afterward, you're going to understand why some stories are so unbelievable that they have to be true. This isn't just about a billionaire and his fiancée having a public meltdown. This is about what happens when love gets tested by the one thing we never expect, the truth. Trust me, you won't believe how this story ends. I barely believe it myself, and I lived it. So buckle up, because we're about to dive into a night that started with champagne and caviar, and ended with me questioning everything I thought I knew about love, money, and the man I was about to marry. Are you ready? Because once I start telling you this story, there's no going back. My name is Imani, and 18 months ago, I thought I had won the lottery of life. Not literally, but close enough. I'm an architect, I design buildings that touch the sky, and I've always been proud of making my own way in the world. But then Sebastian walked into my life like something out of a romance novel, and suddenly everything changed. We met at a gallery opening in Soho. I was there for work, admiring the clean lines of the building's renovation, when this gorgeous man with eyes like dark chocolate approached me. He didn't lead with his money or his success. Instead, he asked me about the architecture, about my work, about my dreams. Sebastian listened in a way that made me feel like I was the most fascinating person in the room. And maybe I was naive, but that felt more valuable than any designer handbag or expensive dinner. The whirlwind that followed still takes my breath away. Private jets to Napa Valley for weekend wine tastings. Box seats at the Met Opera. A penthouse overlooking Central Park that felt like something from a movie. But here's what got me, it wasn't the luxury that swept me off my feet. It was how Sebastian made me feel when we were alone together, curled up on his ridiculously expensive couch, talking about everything and nothing until sunrise. He proposed 6 months ago on the rooftop of our building, with the entire city sparkling below us. The ring was stunning, sure, but what made me say yes was the way his hands shook when he asked. This powerful, confident billionaire was nervous about whether I'd want to spend my life with him. How could I not fall for that vulnerability? My mother, who had spent years worrying I'd never settle down, finally stopped asking when I was going to find a good man. My friends stopped teasing me about my workaholic tendencies. Everyone kept saying how lucky I was, how perfect we were together. And honestly, I believed them. I thought I had it all figured out. The wedding was planned for next month. Vera Wang dress, flowers flown in from Ecuador, a guest list that read like Forbes magazine. I should have been the happiest woman alive. But looking back now, I realize there were little things that should have made me pause. The way Sebastian always insisted on picking up every check but somehow never actually had his wallet ready. How he'd get these mysterious phone calls that made his jaw tense. The way he'd change the subject whenever I asked about his business beyond the surface level. But love makes you blind to red flags, doesn't it? Or maybe it makes you choose not to see them because the dream is just too beautiful to question. The night everything fell apart started like a fairy tale. Sebastian had made reservations at Le Bernardin, this impossibly exclusive French restaurant where getting a table usually requires knowing someone who knows someone. He insisted we celebrate our last month as an engaged couple in style. I remember slipping into the black dress he'd bought me from some boutique I couldn't even pronounce the name of, feeling like the luckiest woman in Manhattan. No. I'm going to Claire's room right now, and I'm telling her everything. Every text, every phone call, every moment. I should have stopped this from happening. She deserves to hear it from her best friend, not discover it when you can't say, I do. Walking down that hotel hallway felt like the longest walk of my life. When I knocked on Claire's door, she opened it glowing with happiness, her hair half done, surrounded by her bridesmaids and family. Seeing her joy made what I had to do even more devastating. Claire, I need to talk to you. Alone. The next hour was the worst of my life. I watched my best friend's world collapse as I confessed everything, the growing feelings, the emotional affair, Ryan's confession that morning. She didn't scream or throw things. She just sat there in her white robe, tears streaming down her face, asking quietly, how long have you been in love with my fiancé? I don't know, I whispered. Maybe I still don't know. But I couldn't let you marry him without knowing the truth. The wedding was called off. Guests were sent home. Claire's family looked at me like I was the devil incarnate. Ryan tried to reach me dozens of times, but I couldn't face him. I had destroyed my best friend's happiness, and for what? A man who would abandon his bride on their wedding day. 6 months later, Ryan wore me down. He showed up everywhere: my office, my apartment, my favorite coffee shop. He swore he'd changed, that he'd made the right choice, that we were meant to be together. Against every instinct I had, I finally agreed to one date. It took exactly 3 weeks of dating Ryan to realize I'd been in love with a fantasy. Without the excitement of forbidden romance, without the thrill of stolen moments, Ryan was ordinary. Worse than ordinary, he was selfish, unreliable, and had a wandering eye that I'd been too infatuated to notice. When I caught him flirting with our waitress on our 4th date, I finally understood what Claire had been dealing with. A year after the wedding that never happened, Claire texted me, "Coffee?" We met at our old spot, and she told me something that changed everything. I found out Ryan had been having emotional affairs our entire relationship. "You weren't the first, Sophia. You were just the one brave enough to tell me the truth." We're rebuilding our friendship slowly, carefully. I learned that sometimes the worst thing you can do becomes the best thing that never happened. And Ryan? He's engaged again. I almost feel sorry for her. So there you have it, the messiest, most complicated year of my life laid bare. I went from being the best friend who was going to create the perfect wedding to being the woman who destroyed it, and somehow ended up being the one who saved my best friend from the biggest mistake of her life. Life has a twisted sense of humor, doesn't it? Here's what I learned from this whole disaster: sometimes doing the right thing feels absolutely terrible in the moment. Standing in that hotel hallway, knowing I was about to shatter Claire's heart, felt like the worst thing I could possibly do. But letting her marry a man who was already emotionally cheating? That would have been so much worse. The truth hurts, but lies destroy everything they touch. I also learned that the difference between real love and infatuation is time and honesty. When I was sneaking around having deep conversations with Ryan, everything felt intense and meaningful. But when we were actually together, without the drama and secrecy, there was nothing substantial underneath. I was in love with the idea of being chosen, not with who he actually was. The biggest lesson? Your gut knows things your heart doesn't want to admit. I knew something was wrong from the moment Ryan started texting me late at night. I knew it was wrong when I started looking forward to his calls more than Claire's. I knew it was wrong when I found myself getting dressed up for vendor meetings. But I ignored every red flag because it felt good to be wanted, to be understood, to be the center of someone's attention. Claire and I are still working on our friendship. Some days are better than others. She's dating someone new now, a guy who actually shows up when he says he will and doesn't need emotional validation from other women. As for me, I'm taking a break from romance and focusing on being the kind of friend I should have been all along. If this story hit you in the feels, if you've ever been caught between loyalty and desire, if you've ever had to make the choice between protecting someone's feelings and telling them the truth they need to hear, then smash that like button and let me know in the comments. Have you ever been in a situation where doing the right thing felt like the hardest choice you could make? I want to hear your stories too, and definitely subscribe because I've got more real-life drama coming your way, stories about family secrets, workplace betrayals, and the kind of karma that makes you believe the universe really is keeping score. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when people think they can get away with anything. Spoiler alert, they can't. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives teach us who we really are. I'm still figuring out who that is, but at least now I know she's someone who chooses truth over comfort, even when it costs everything. But something felt off from the moment we sat down. Sebastian kept checking his phone, which wasn't like him. During dinner, he was Sebastian the performer, charming the sommelier, making the waitress laugh, putting on the show he was so good at. But I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. When I asked if everything was okay, he brushed it off with that perfect Sebastian smile and ordered another bottle of champagne. The evening was going perfectly until it wasn't. When the check came, Sebastian reached for his black American Express card with his usual confidence. But when the waiter returned, his face was apologetic. "I'm sorry, sir, but this card has been declined." I watched Sebastian's face freeze for just a second before he laughed it off, pulling out another card. "Banking error," he said with a wave of his hand. "Happens all the time with large accounts." Except the second card got declined too. And then the third. The restaurant manager appeared at our table like a ghost, speaking in hushed tones about perhaps resolving this privately. Other diners were starting to notice, their conversations dying down as they turned to watch our table. I felt my cheeks burning with embarrassment, but not for myself, for Sebastian, who looked like he was about to explode. That's when I offered to pay. It seemed like the natural thing to do. We were engaged, we were partners, and I had my own money. But Sebastian's reaction shocked me. He snapped at me so harshly that the couple at the next table actually turned around. "I don't need you to rescue me, Imani. I can handle this. But he couldn't handle it. He started making demands, raising his voice about how the restaurant should know who he is. The Sebastian I knew, patient, kind, thoughtful, vanished completely. In his place was this angry, entitled stranger who cared more about his wounded pride than the fact that I was sitting there, humiliated and confused. The final straw came when he turned to me and said, "Just sit there and let me handle this. I don't need the little woman making this worse." The words hit me like a slap. In that moment, sitting in that beautiful restaurant wearing that expensive dress, I realized I had become nothing more than an accessory to him. A pretty ornament for his perfect life. That's when I picked up my wine glass, looked him straight in the eye, and threw the entire contents across his face. The silence that followed was deafening. Red wine dripped from Sebastian's shocked face onto his white shirt, and every person in that restaurant was staring at us. But for the first time all evening, I felt completely calm. I stood up, placed my napkin on the table, and walked out without saying a word. My hands weren't even shaking. The taxi ride home was a blur of city lights and racing thoughts. My phone kept buzzing with angry texts from Sebastian, but I couldn't bring myself to read them. All I could think about was that moment when he called me the little woman. In 18 months together, I had never seen that side of him. It was like watching a mask slip off someone's face and realizing you'd been in love with a stranger. When I got to our penthouse, I just sat on the couch in my expensive dress, staring at the engagement ring on my finger. That's when my best friend Destiny showed up with ice cream and wine, ready for what she assumed would be a typical relationship crisis. But when I told her what happened, her face went serious in a way I'd never seen before. "Imani," she said, "when was the last time Sebastian actually paid for something when you were watching?" The question hit me like a punch to the stomach because I couldn't remember. Ever. He always made grand gestures about picking up checks, but now that I really thought about it, there was always some excuse, some delay, some reason why the payment happened when I wasn't looking. That's when Destiny suggested we look around the apartment. I felt like I was betraying him, but something in my gut told me I needed answers. In Sebastian's office, hidden behind files about wedding vendors and honeymoon planning, we found stacks of unpaid bills. Legal documents with words like asset freeze and federal investigation jumped out at me from pages I could barely comprehend. My hands were shaking as I opened his laptop. I know I shouldn't have, but I couldn't stop myself. What I found made my blood run cold. Email after email from lawyers, accountants, and investigators. Messages about missing investor funds, frozen bank accounts, and something called a Ponzi scheme that I didn't fully understand but knew was very, very bad. The worst part was finding emails from his assistant from weeks ago, warning him that his credit cards were being cancelled and that he needed to prepare Imani for the transition. He had known this was coming. He had known that night at the restaurant would be a disaster, and he had taken me there anyway. As I sat there surrounded by evidence of a life built on lies, I realized that the man I was going to marry in 4 weeks didn't actually exist. The Sebastian I loved was as fictional as the wealth that had dazzled me. And tomorrow morning, apparently, the whole world was going to find out. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in our living room, watching the sunrise paint the city gold, waiting for my world to officially collapse. And at exactly 7 a.m., it did. My phone started buzzing with news alerts, and there it was on every financial website: tech billionaire Sebastian Cross under federal investigation for $50 million Ponzi scheme. Seeing his face on the news made it real in a way that finding those documents hadn't. The reporters were calling him a master manipulator, a con artist who had stolen millions from investors while living a lavish lifestyle. They showed pictures of our penthouse, our vacations, even the engagement announcement we'd posted just months ago. I felt sick realizing that my happiness had been built on other people's stolen dreams. When Sebastian finally came home that morning, he looked like a broken man. Gone was the confident billionaire, replaced by someone who could barely meet my eyes. He sat across from me at our kitchen table and, for the first time since I'd known him, told me the complete truth: the company had been failing for over a year. Instead of admitting defeat, he had started using new investor money to pay old investors, telling himself it was temporary. The lie had grown and grown until it consumed everything. Even our engagement ring had been bought with stolen money. He was facing 15 years in federal prison, and everything we owned would be seized to pay back the people he'd hurt. "I love you, Imani," he said, tears streaming down his face. "That was never a lie. But I was too ashamed to tell you that everything else was." He handed me a letter from his lawyer explaining that I could walk away completely clean since my name wasn't on anything. I had an out. A chance to pretend this had never happened and rebuild my life without the scandal touching me. But as I looked at this broken man across from me, I realized something that surprised even myself. The wine I had thrown in his face had washed away. More than just his arrogance, it had revealed who he really was underneath all the lies. And somehow, this vulnerable, frightened, honest version of Sebastian was more real than the billionaire had ever been. That's when I made a choice that everyone called crazy. Instead of walking away, I chose to stay. Not for his money, which was gone. Not for the lifestyle, which had been an illusion. But for the man I saw sitting there, finally telling me the truth. Because sometimes love isn't about who someone is when they have everything. Sometimes it's about who they become when they've lost it all and have nothing left to hide behind. The road ahead was going to be harder than anything I'd ever imagined. But it was going to be real. 3 years later, I'm sitting in a small coffee shop in Brooklyn, writing this story on my laptop while Sebastian teaches a financial literacy class to teenagers at the community center next door. He was released early for good behavior and cooperation with the federal investigation. He paid back every penny he could, sold everything he owned, and now works to make sure other young people don't make the mistakes he did. We got married 6 months ago. Not in the Plaza Hotel with 300 guests like we'd originally planned, but in a courthouse with just our parents present. I wore a dress I bought myself, and Sebastian's wedding ring cost $40 from a vintage shop in Queens. It was the most beautiful wedding I could have ever imagined. People ask me all the time if I regret throwing that wine in his face. The truth is, it was the best thing I ever did. Because in that moment, I stopped being the woman who was impressed by what someone could buy me, and became the woman who knew what real love actually looked like. Sometimes the wine we throw in anger washes away the lies we've been living. If this story moved you, smash that like button and let me know in the comments. Have you ever had a moment that completely changed how you saw someone you loved? Subscribe for more incredible true stories that prove love isn't about what someone can give you, but about who they choose to become when they have nothing left to lose. Remember, real love survives when everything else gets stripped away. And sometimes, the most dramatic moments reveal not just who someone really is, but who we really are too. Thanks for taking this journey with me.